What happens when we step forward instead of looking away? That's the question at the heart of Parshat Vayigash. You're listening to Torah in 7, a podcast by Lubavitch International where we explore the story behind the story of the weekly Torah reading. I'm your host, Bela Olidard, and I want to dedicate this episode to the memory of the murdered in last week's terror attack in Bondi Beach, Australia. May Hashem bring solace to their families and healing and recovery to the wounded. Before we begin, I want to say that in these podcasts, I take as my guide the interpretive principle that the text never departs from its literal sense. But the Torah is a many-layered world, and I hope these 7 minutes inspire you to go deeper. This week, the drama of Yosef's story finally comes to its climax and resolution. It is the last great narrative of the book of Breshit, which will come to an end next week, and it gives us a vantage point from which we can look back and see how the Torah's deepest ideas are revealed not only through laws, but through the texture of human lives, the weight of private decisions, and the cost of stepping forward. Let's begin. Last week, Binyamin was accused of stealing Joseph's goblet and is faced with a life of slavery. Yehuda now steps forward to speak to the Egyptian viceroy, still unaware that he is speaking to Yosef. He delivers a long and heartfelt speech, recounting their father Yaakov's attachment to Binyamin, the only remaining child of his beloved Rachel, and what the loss of Binyamin would do to him. Yosef is now bursting with emotion and can no longer contain himself. He clears the room, reveals his identity, weeps, and embraces his brothers. He sends for his father Yaakov, and all 70 souls descend to Egypt. The family is reunited. But what is it specifically that Yehuda says in his speech that makes Yosef finally break down? Yehuda offers himself in place of Binyamin. He says, "Take me as a slave instead of the boy. Ki avdecha arav et hanar, for your servant undertook surety for the boy. Arav, I am his guarantor. I assumed surety." It's a legal concept. This is a risky position, and Proverbs warns repeatedly against being an arev, guaranteeing another in this way, because it can cost you everything. This kind of arevut is dangerous. In fact, when Eov, needs a guarantor, he turns to God and says, "Sima na arveni imach," be surety for me, because no human being would enter into this kind of obligation with me. Likewise, the psalmist says, "Arov avdecha litov," be surety for your servant for good. He turns to God because this kind of arevut is so weighty, so risky, that human beings normally cannot offer it. It is an act so rare that only God himself is expected to perform it. Yet Yehuda volunteers to be an arev for another human being, and he steps forward. Years earlier, if we remember from last week's Parsha, Yehuda gave Tamar an eravon, a pledge using objects, a seal, a cord, a staff. Objects he can hand over and retrieve through an intermediary. Responsibility at arm's length. But life has changed Yehuda. He is not the same person who sold his brother down to Egypt. Now, he doesn't offer token assurances for Binyamin's safety. His arevut has moved from property to personhood. He offers himself, "Anochi a'arvenu miyadi tivakshenu." I will be surety for him. You can seek or demand him from my hand. And he is prepared to stand in for his brother, telling Yosef, "Take me as a slave instead. Let the boy go free." This arevut restores the wholeness and peace to the family, which in a way was what Yaakov sought in the first place when this entire drama began. Let's remember what Yaakov said when he sent Yosef to check on his brothers. He said, "Go see the shalom of your brothers. Go see how they are faring." Yosef went, and when he couldn't find them, a stranger asked him what he was looking for. "I am seeking my brothers. Et achai anochi mevakesh," he said. Now, more than 20 years later, Yehuda's words, "Miyadi tivakshenu," you can seek him from me, echoes Yosef's long ago, "Et achai anochi mevakesh," I am seeking my brothers. And this time, peace will become possible because someone is finally willing to carry responsibility all the way through. Yaakov is in utter disbelief when his sons tell him that Yosef is alive. But then he sees the wagons Yosef sent to bring the family down to Egypt, And says the Midrash, he is finally convinced, because the word for wagons, agalot, reminded Yaakov of the word eglah, related to the last thing they had studied together before Yosef disappeared. What was that? It was the law of eglah arufah. It's a law in Deuteronomy, and it says that when a body is found in the field between cities and no one knows who killed him, the elders of the nearest city must formally declare their innocence. Even though they are innocent, they are still held responsible for the death of a stranger in their midst. Yehuda doesn't just understand that ethic, he lives it. And that is why he, not Reuven, the firstborn, and not Yosef, becomes the ancestor of kings. Because real leadership begins with arevut, with a willingness to say, I take responsibility. Compare that to Cain's response of chilling indifference to his brother at the beginning of Bereshit when God asks him, where is your brother? It's the first question about human responsibility in the Torah, and Cain answers, Hashomer achi anochi? Am I my brother's keeper? In other words, not my problem, not my responsibility. Arevut can't be legislated. No one can be forced to say, Anochi ervenu. And yet, we recognize it when we see it. We see people step up, sometimes directly into danger, to take responsibility when no one requires it of them, when they can look the other way and no one would be the wiser. That's why those moments stay with us. Yehuda's arevut isn't just loyalty to his father or fidelity to his word. It's the decision to make his brother's fate his own. And if you've ever had someone like that in your life, you know how rare and how precious that kind of bond is. When even one person is willing to step forward like that, it changes everything. Yehuda's willingness to stand in for his brother doesn't just save Binyamin, it makes forgiveness possible. And in a world so quick to say, that's not my responsibility, moments like that remind us what actually holds people together. That's my takeaway from Parshat Vayigash. If you found this meaningful, please click the subscribe button below. Shabbat Shalom.